All right, we're now live on Facebook. So good evening, everyone. Good evening, IFNG. Good evening, Niners Squad. So, Sir Marbs, kindly introduce
Hi, good
our lecture
evening.
for tonight.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Ielts Filipino Nurses Group. And tonight, we're honored again to have one of the expert of Niner 9.0, Mr. Brian. Sir Brian,
Hi.
welcome back.
It's glad to be here all the time.
Welcome, sir.
Okay. Yeah. So can I get started now with the session? I'm just looking
Yes,
at the
sir.
Facebook Live right now, and I'm looking at the audience. So not a lot of people have joined yet. But anyway, to everyone who's attending this session for tonight, welcome to IFNG in collaboration with 9.09er IELTS Review and Tutorial Center. And today we are going to discuss another one of your PTE series. Actually, this is the last one in a series of 4. So we have a total of 4 different lessons for PTE already uploaded on the IFNG page. So if you haven't watched the other videos for PTE, you can actually go ahead and look at the posts from before and the videos that have been uploaded on PTE here at IFNG. Okay, so pleasant evening, everybody, and welcome to this class. Today, I'm going to talk about IELTS mainly for the listening component, and also I'm going to compare it against the Pearson Test of English Academic so that you would actually be able to tell the differences and the similarities between the two, because I would say they're actually pretty similar to some extent. You just have more question types for the Pearson Test of English. And maybe after this class, you would be able to finally make that decision of whether this is the best examination for you to take, or maybe you would want to stick with IELTS, or maybe you'd want to take a different examination. All right, hopefully this class will help you to decide what particular what particular exam you will be sitting for your overseas applications. Okay, so yeah, without further ado, let's get started with this lesson. By the way, I would like to formally introduce myself for those people who have not seen me before here at IFNG. My name is Brian. I'm one of the lecturers of 9.09er IELTS Review and Tutorial Center. I've been teaching IELTS for the past 11 years and PTE for a few years now. I have taken both exams, the IELTS and the PTE, and have scored perfect marks across the board for both exams. So I got 9 across the board in all of the parts of IELTS plus the overall, and the same scores as well for my Pearson Test of English Academic, in which I got 90 in all of the areas of the test. Okay, so today we're going to talk about IELTS versus PTE listening. I know a lot of you are not so interested when it comes to listening because you feel like, oh, listening is just an easy examination. I can probably take this test and get the good score without actually preparing that much for the listening component, because it's very relatable for a lot of Filipinos since we listen to English every time. In fact, I have noticed that here in the Philippines, there's not really that much difficulty when it comes to the listening component, whether it be for IELTS, OET, PTE, or any other examination for that matter, for the simple reason that Filipinos are so acquainted and are so attentive, in that they have been exposed to so many people speaking English. In fact, here in the Philippines, you wouldn't really see a lot of people going to the movie theaters and asking for subtitles. You can understand the entire thing, sit through the entire movie, and comprehend everything that the people are saying in the movie and not have any difficulty. But I need to also um, send this message to everybody that listening for IELTS or listening for PTE or any other English exam for that matter, it's not just about being able to comprehend things, but also to apply, being able to apply the correct strategies and the techniques that are necessary for you to ace the exam. Because Just like any other English examination, IELTS and the Pearson Test of English would have recordings, but you cannot replay them. The recordings will be played once only, as I will discuss in the succeeding slides. Okay, so let's get started with IELTS listening. And I understand that a lot of people here are taking the IELTS. This is IFNG after all. So definitely plenty of the attendees for tonight are taking the IELTS. So for you guys who are taking the IELTS, this is a quick overview of what
Hello, sir.
anyone like I'm sorry. What's going on? Yeah, I'm slowing down my connection. Is that a
You
problem?
were lost, sir.
Yeah, you
You were
lost me
lost.
for a bit. I'm sorry about that. There was like a drop in my internet connection. So anyway, I will repeat what I said. So here in the Philippines, the easiest subtest and the best subtest is listening. Our average in the Philippines for IELTS listening is very high. In fact, one of the highest in the entire world. It's at 7.2 to 7.3, give or take, depending on the year. But the performance will not be below 7.0. So you can just imagine how very attentive and how very skilled candidates are in the Philippines when it comes to the listening subtest. This is the first subtest in the written exams for IELTS. So I have already talked about the other subtests. And for IELTS, we have 3 written exams: the listening test, the reading examination, and the writing test. Now, I would also have to attribute the very good performance of Filipinos when it comes to the listening examination to the fact that it is the first examination that you're going to take for the written subtests, because you're still very fresh, you're still very excited, and you're not yet tired or drained from the different examinations of IELTS. And so you're able to give your best performance for the listening component of the IELTS. Now, this is not the case when it comes to PT. I'm going to discuss later, because in PTE, listening is the last exam. And in most cases, this is actually where a lot of Filipinos don't get a good score at. It's either speaking or listening, not so much reading, not so much writing, but listening and speaking. And again, I will attribute that perhaps to the fact that the listening test is the last examination for the Pearson Test of English. So for IELTS, it's the first subtest, and it's composed of 40 questions, 40 different questions that you will have to respond to. 4 sections, which I'm going to discuss in thorough detail later, and 40 minutes to accomplish everything. Now, if you are taking the computer delivered IELTS, on the other hand, you have to make sure that you finish everything within 30 minutes, and you don't really have that much transfer time. You only have 2 minutes checking time. So usually the test will be shorter if you're taking the computer delivered IELTS. You have a total of 30 minutes to answer your questions on your test booklet. This is the time when you're going to be listening to the recordings and answering questions at the same time. You know, for IELTS, one thing that you need to understand is that the listening test is not self-paced. You're not the one who's going to pace the exam, but it's actually the recording that's going to set the pace for the test. So you have to make sure that you follow the recordings, and usually the recordings will play for a total of 30 minutes. And this is also the same amount of time that you should be spending answering the questions initially on your test booklet if you're taking the paper-based exam. Now, please exercise due caution when you're taking the computer delivered exam, because sometimes there are people who are writing their answers on the sheet of paper that's provided for them during the test, and they want to transfer those answers later on onto the computer. I don't think that is actually a very practical thing to do in the examination. I wouldn't really suggest that this particular practice because you don't really have transfer time for the computer delivered exam. You have to type your answers directly onto the computer if you want to make sure you complete the test on time. All right. So again, that's 30 minutes to listen to the recordings and also to answer the questions initially on your test booklets or directly type your answers on the computer if it's a computer-based test. In your examination, you will be provided extra time, 10 minutes to be very precise, to transfer your answers from your listening test booklets to your answer sheets. Take note, listening is the only examination in IELTS that provides extra transfer time. For the reading examination and the writing test, after 1 hour is over, the test is done. You will have to submit your papers or you have to turn in your answer sheets regardless of whether you finished or you didn't. Now, for the listening examination, you'll have 10 minutes to check your answers or transfer your answers to your answer sheets, just in case you haven't done so yet during the test. Now, for the computer-delivered examination, as I have already mentioned a while ago, you only have 2 minutes checking time just to make sure that the consistency is there. You have made sure that everything is spelled correctly and you have placed your answers on the right boxes or the right areas, or you didn't miss an item. Just in case you skipped an item, you probably guessed the most appropriate answer for that question, especially for multiple choice. I don't really suggest that you leave anything blank. So if you left anything blank, that 2 minutes extra time after the test is over might be used to check all of those answers that you haven't yet placed on the computer. All of the answers for the listening examination will be mentioned in the recording. Actually, don't really need to use a lot of brains here. You just have to comprehend what you're hearing because everything that you need to write on your answer sheet, all of the answers can be found in the recordings. All you need to do is to wait for the answers to be mentioned and you just have to write them on your answer sheet. Pretty simple, right? Sounds very easy. That's why a lot of people do not review that much for listening, but I don't want you to take this lightly, guys, because if you do not get a good score in the listening examination, it's not only, well, ultimately very embarrassing, but it's also going to affect your chances of getting the scores that you require, especially in certain countries. I understand that some of you might be going to the UK, some of you might be going to Australia, and you need pretty high grades. And some of you might be going to Canada, very high grades for Canada. We have 8.5 as the highest requirement for Canada. So can you imagine a single mistake can actually cost you 0.5 band scores most of the time and might actually also cost you your invitation letter going to Canada. So you have to make sure that you pay very close attention. You don't lose your place while you're listening to the recording, even if the answers are all going to be mentioned in the recorded scripts. Also, it is worth noting that in your listening examination, the recording will be played once only. There will be no repetition, and I don't really think that any other examination for that matter will repeat the recordings. There will be no repetitions, okay? So you will get to listen to the recording once, and if you don't get anything or you didn't get an answer for a particular item, it's time to move on. It's time to let go because you can't go back to that item anymore. You've lost it. So it's time to move on to the next item. One common mistake of people is that they want to answer everything and they want to get a perfect score. So if they miss a particular item, they can't let go of that item and they want to keep on finding the answer to that item. And unfortunately, in the examination, answers are rarely, very rarely repeated. So chances are you wouldn't be able to hear that same answer again, and you will lose more answers, or you will lose the opportunity to answer more questions in the process because you're so focused on getting the right answer for one item, and that will actually cause a lot of problems in your examination. So you have to learn how to let go. You have to learn how to move on. It's an essential part of life. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what happens in your IELTS listening subtest. Before each of the sections, you will be given time to read the questions. And during this time as well, if you want to encircle keywords or underline them or take down notes, go ahead and do so. You can actually do that when you're taking the paper-based exam. This is one of the disadvantages of the computer-delivered examination that I can see, because you can't really write notes on the computer-delivered listening exam. You can do so for reading, I think, but for the listening examination, it's quite different. So you can't really plan out what you're going to write, or can't really anticipate that effectively what you're going to hear in the recordings, because there's very little opportunity for you to highlight or to underline things, especially when your question in IELTS is a map, and you know how difficult maps are. You can't actually plot things, draw things, or write arrows or something on the computer screen. So I think that is quite difficult for a number of people, especially when they're taking the computer delivered IELTS. So I think that's one very significant deal breaker when it comes to the listening examination, right? For computer delivered IELTS. So maybe this class will also help you and guide you to decide whether you would want to take computer delivered IELTS or you'd want to stick to the traditional paper-based examination. Because in the paper-based exams, I've already mentioned, you can encircle, you can underline, you can take down notes, you can draw, you can do anything you want on your question paper. Okay? Now, moving on, after that, you will be given some time to read the questions, right? You will be answering questions while the recording plays. So usually in IELTS, you will hear a prompt. It tells you that you have some time to look at certain items. For example, now look at questions 1 to 4. So you can look at questions 1 to 4, underline the keywords, make sure that you have everything planned out, you know what to anticipate. And then after that, you will hear the recording play. And that's the time for you to answer your questions. But wait, there's more. After each of the sections or each of the parts, we call them parts right now, there are 4 parts in the test. You will be given time to check your answers. Typically, you have around 30 seconds to check your answers for every section, just to make sure everything is consistent, everything is grammatically correct, or perhaps there are no spelling errors or things like that. You have 30 seconds after each of the sections, or half a minute, to check your answers. And then once the entire thing is over, you've heard all of the recordings, you will be given time to transfer your answers or check your answers for a couple of minutes for computer delivered examination. Okay, so for the paper-based examination, you can transfer your answers from your test booklet to your answer sheet. For the computer-delivered exam, you'll have time to check your answers. And that's why this is quite easy, because it gives you so many opportunities for you to check your answers or double check everything just before you turn in your paper. So a lot of people find the listening examination to be a very easy exam for them, and they are very comfortable sitting through all of the different sections of the test because there are breaks in between anyway. 30 seconds to rest just before you go to the next section, and plenty of time right before you hear any recording to study the questions carefully and anticipate what you're going to hear. Now, moving on to the next slide, I'd like to talk about the contents of the examination. Have you ever wondered why there are no modules for IELTS listening? There are no modules for IELTS listening, by the way. I mean, for writing and for reading, there are modules. They're module sensitive. So if you are receiving like a paper-based, general training or academic, you have a different set of reading and writing tests. But for the listening exam and for the speaking examination, there are no modules. So they're going to be identical regardless of the module that you're taking in the examination. I'll explain that in a bit. Half of your examination will be in the general context. This is for GT or general training. They are in the everyday scenarios or social context, which means say these are things that you get to experience on a day-to-day basis. Part 1 is going to be a dialogue in which two people will be talking to each other, or maybe sometimes even more than two people, but a minimum of two people will be having a conversation in the first part of your examination. It can be a transaction or maybe a shopping activity or making a holiday reservation or booking an accommodation or perhaps having an interview. These are the kinds of things that you will encounter when you are already abroad living in an English speaking nation on a day-to-day basis. That's why it's called social in context, right? Now, part 2 is going to be very identical to part 1 in terms of the types of conversations or the types of speeches that you will hear, but the scripts are going to be monologues. When we say a monologue, there's only one person talking. It can be an informational talk. Like only one person is giving information. It can probably be the case that there are two people, but one person is just going to give an open-ended question and the other person will be giving a very lengthy discussion. But still, everything is going to be in the general or everyday context or social context. So these are very relatable. Some examples would be, for example, a person giving you a tour of the zoo or giving you an introduction about the library services there are in a school. So this is in the general context, or one police officer talking about the crimes in the community, something like that. Okay, now moving on to part 3 of your examination, including part 4, by the way, they are going to now transition into the academic context. So the first half will be in the general context, the other half will be the academic contexts. They are school or training related contexts or scenarios or things that you will not normally encounter on a day-to-day basis, but instead what you're going to get if you are studying in a university or perhaps practicing your profession or perhaps working in a particular organization abroad. Part 3 is going to be a dialogue. For example, it's going to be a tutorial or an assignment or research project, and people will be brainstorming about ideas. So that's a very common occurrence when you when you go to part 3 of your examination. And part 4 of your examination is going to be a monologue, and it's also in the school or training related context. It's going to be a full lecture or seminar. So it's kind of long. It's going to be around 8 to 10 minutes long, and you have to answer about 10 questions for part 4 of the test. And so I would have to say that the first 2 parts of the examination for IELTS are pretty easy because of the social nature of the conversations that you're going to hear. And your examination gets hard when you get to part 3 and 4. So if there's any strategy that I want to share with you, of course, there are plenty of strategies that you can learn for listening. But if there's one that I would like to share with you tonight, I want you to make sure that you invest in the easier parts of the exam, because at the end of the day, you get only 1 point per question, regardless of the difficulty. Whether it is an easy question, an average question, or a difficult question, you only get 1 point for that. So if you can focus on the easier questions, you can get a pretty decent score for the first 2 parts of the test, perhaps, or 20 out of 20 items for the first half, then you will have much less pressure and much less anxiety when you get to the latter parts of the examination when the exam gets tougher. Right? You wouldn't want to chase after points when the examination gets more difficult, because that's going to cause a lot of panic, and that's also going to make your concentration extremely poor. Why am I saying that? Because when you're anxious, when you are very nervous or you're very tense or you're very pressured, your attention is significantly or severely affected. You cannot focus or concentrate when you're in a state of panic, when you're very anxious or very tense, because you know that you're chasing after points. You're not in a very relaxed and receptive state, and usually that leads to more mistakes, right? So, yeah, these are the four different parts of your examination. The typical types of questions that you will receive in your examination, regardless of your module, whether it's academic or general training, will be the same. For example, for IELTS, you have multiple choice or gap fill, note completion. These are very common types of questions for your listening examination. But if I were to give an opinion about the test format for IELTS, I would have to say that it's very straightforward. That's why reviewing for the listening component isn't that hard. After a few tries or after a few practice sets, you already get the hang of it, and you are able to feel more comfortable sitting through all of the parts of the examination, and you feel confident that you can ace your examination or wing it the first time you try. Unlike other examinations, and I'm going to talk about PTE later, there are so many different components or different question types, and it can be a bit confusing if you haven't actually studied for all of the question types, because you will strain your brain trying to figure out what the instructions are asking of you. For IELTS, it's very straightforward. So it's, I think, to me, the most straightforward listening examination out there that a lot of you will be able to relate to and will not have to spend so much time studying. And relatively, it's an easy examination, right? The problem with IELTS is not really listening. It's more about your reading and writing tests, in particular the writing test. And sometimes to some students, because there's the subjectivity factor involved, the examiner factor involved, sometimes speaking can be a problem as well. But the listening component is not that much of an issue when you're taking your IELTS. All right, so I would want to go and look at all of the questions on Facebook. There are not a lot of questions. Alpin is asking, hi, sir, what is the band score for Canada? Non-academic for a job seeker only. I'm not really sure exactly what your profession is and what the requirements are for a job seeker. I haven't really experienced this before, or I haven't really had an experience with a student going to Canada for a job seeker visa. Not sure if that's available. But I know that for some skilled trade workers, it can be as low as 5.0 or 4.0, depending on the skilled trade. So some butchers, for example, or pipe fitters, line workers, welders, or agricultural workers can apply with as low as 4.0 or 5.0, but it will really depend on the requirements of your agency. So please figure that out with your agency, because they will be in the position to tell you what the best scores are or what the requirements are for your application. Okay, there are not a lot of questions. Okay, so here's a question from Christine. Any techniques, sir, that are helpful for multiple choice types of questions and listening? Oh yeah, right. Multiple choice is very difficult, and the difficulty stems from the fact that you're doing a lot of things at the same time. So if you're not really good with multitasking, because you're listening to the recording, you're looking at the questions, you're comparing the options, and at the same time, you're figuring out which one is the correct answer. So it requires multitasking skills. So if you're not really accustomed to that, or you're not a multitasker, my suggestion is to make sure that you have you've highlighted the important keywords before you hear anything, and you remember all of the options, because it's going to be very hard for you to juggle so many different things at the same time when the recording is already starting, or when the recording has already played. It's going to be very hard for you to catch up, especially if you miss a particular item. Moreover, if you don't know where you are, then you can take down notes. on the side of your paper. You can jot down notes, important details or whatnot, and try to guess the correct answers. If you're not sure what your answers are, just guess after the recording is over. At least you have your notes right there. Who knows, maybe you got the right answer, or maybe you didn't get the right answer, but you can actually make an intelligent guess out of all of the notes that you have taken down. At least you have a source for your answer and you didn't just get an answer out of thin air, right? So those are my top tips for multiple choice questions. There are more that I can share with you, and during the rationalization portion of our lectures here at 9.09, or if you're a student, we usually explain how things are extracted from the recordings. What's the band score requirement for student visa for the US? According to Clary. Oh, Clary, I need to tell you that when it comes to student visas, it will be greatly dependent on the requirements of your school, because every school is different from one another. And I need to tell you also that it depends on your degree program, because you might be taking a particular degree that is more advanced than some people who are just pursuing, say for example, a diploma course. So your degree or the course that you're taking will have an impact on the score requirement. Plus also your specialization or your course, because if, for example, I'll give you a perfect example. If you're pursuing speech communication or speech therapy, or perhaps if you are pursuing a master's degree in journalism, then of course you're expected to get as high as 8.5 overall band score. But if you are applying for, say, for example, a business course, then it might be just as low as 6.5 or 7.0 for a master's. So again, that will be greatly dependent on the course that you're pursuing going to the US. Here is, that's not really a question, but more of a response according to Tom. For medtechs, I'm sorry, for medical technologists, I'm pretty sure that the requirements would be 7.0 for speaking and 6.5 overall band score for registration. I'm not sure if it's the same for university. So perhaps just to be safe, just get a straight 7 so that you'll know that you fit in regardless of what university you're trying to enroll in and what the requirements of those universities are, just to be safe. But for registration, I think it's 7 for speaking and a 6.5 overall band score. Okay, right. So I think that I have discussed most of the things that I need to discuss for the listening component of IELTS. Let's go now and jump straight away to PTE listening. It's very identical in the sense that you're also going to hear the recordings once only, and you're also going to be able to get all of the answers from the recordings, but it's a little bit more complicated because there's so many question types. Now, I can't discuss all of these question types today, but I'm going to give you some examples of question types for the examination so that you know what you're going to expect in the test. In total, we have 8 different types of questions for the listening examination. And as you can see here, I'm not really asking you to read because this is quite tough. The font is too small. Most of the questions for listening are not just for listening. They also involve other skills. For example, summarize spoken text is a type of question that you take for listening. However, it also impacts greatly your score for the writing component. I think listening is a very important and integral part of your PTE, because if you don't get a good score in many of the components of your listening examination, that will not only translate into a lower score for listening, but also for the other components of the test. Okay, so I'm going to start by introducing you to perhaps one of the toughest types of questions for listening in PTE. This is called summarize spoken text. So basically what happens here is you will be hearing a recording, and after you hear the recording, Of course, you will have to take down notes based on the recording that you've heard. You will be given 10 minutes to write a summary that is 50 to 70 words in length, highlighting the important or vital information that you have heard in the recording. I think this is pretty tough. Honestly, it's actually pretty hard for you to get the right key points because the recordings are quite fast in comparison with IELTS with very fabricated and very slow recordings. The recordings in PTE are somewhat close to the natural pacing, so they're a lot faster compared to what you get for IELTS. So you have to take down notes, and then for 10 minutes, you will have to summarize what you have heard in 50 to 70 words. This part of the examination will impact not only listening, but also your writing score. So yeah, it's quite tough, and you get about 2 to 3 slides for this one. Next, we have multiple choice, choose multiple answers. This is also very hard because in IELTS, I heard someone a while ago saying, what's the secret to getting a good score for multiple choice? And I was like thinking, oh my gosh, that's just one choice that's correct. But what if you have more options that are correct? We have multiple choice, choose multiple answers. Sometimes you get 6 different options and you have to select which ones are correct and which ones are not. And this has negative scoring. What does that mean when you say negative scoring? It's right minus wrong, guys. So if you get correct answers, but you also picked the wrong answers, you're going to get negative scoring. So you're going to get, deductions depending on the number of incorrect items that you have selected. So you have to be very cautious when you're answering multiple choice, choose multiple answers. All right, so we have fill in the blanks, and this is a lot easier compared to what you get in IELTS. Let me explain because that's a very long, slide. If you're going to see all of the text there and you're going to read everything, it's going to take a lot of time. So let me just explain the difference between fill in the blanks for IELTS and fill in the blanks for PTE. Are there differences between the two? Yes, because for IELTS, you need comprehension. You have to understand because the recording is not precisely the same as what you're going to hear. What you're going to see in the questions. So the questions are sometimes not exactly mentioned in the recording. Sometimes the information that you see in your questionnaire might be paraphrased in the recording. In PTE, it doesn't happen like that. For fill in the blanks for PTE, the entire transcript of the recording can be found on the computer screen. And all you need to do is to fill out the missing words or the gaps in the recording, the things that you've heard but they're not placed in the transcript. So you're going to hear the exact same thing as what you're seeing on screen. Just have to follow it with your eyes, and if there's a blank, you pay attention because that's the answer. That's pretty easy actually. So that's an advantage when you're taking the PTE over IELTS. All right, so another one is very, very difficult. This is called highlight correct summary. So what you're going to hear here is a very long recording. And from that very long recording, around 30 seconds, you have to select the correct statement that best summarizes what you have heard in the recording. Pretty tough, but you only get around 2 points for this one, so it's not really that significant. So yeah, you also get what we call multiple choice, choose single answer. Very, very identical to what you get in IELTS. You just have to select from about 3 or 4 options, and there's only one correct answer. There's no negative scoring here because there's only one correct response. There's also what we call select missing word. This one is actually, I don't know, it's really fun actually. What you're going to hear here is actually a pretty long recording. So you're going to hear a recording, and then the last few words or the last word is bleeped. Yeah, there's like, it's censored. And there will be options. You have to select which one best fills that bleep section of the recording. Which one's going to complete the recording? It's really fun. So you just have to figure out how the recording will end. It's also pretty easy, I would have to say. Select missing word. Now, this one is a rather difficult question type. It's called highlight incorrect words. Very similar to fill in the blanks in that the entire transcript of the recorded script will be found on your computer screen. So all you need to do is to follow through the recording, and you have to be an effective fault finder. Are you a fault finder? If you're a fault finder, this is the perfect exam for you, because you have to highlight or click the words that are wrong. So there are words in your transcript that are not the same with the actual recording, and you have to be able to identify what those mistakes are. This also has negative scoring, so you can't just select everything and make everything wrong, because you're going to get deductions for the words that you highlighted that are not actually correct answers. Okay, so that's highlight incorrect words. And we have write from dictation, right? Write from dictation is actually very important in the Pearson test of English, and this is quite tough. I think I have talked about the Pearson test of English before for speaking, and I have actually discussed one component there called repeat sentence, in which you're going to hear a recording. You have to blurt out what you have heard exactly as you've heard it. Now, this one is quite difficult because you will be hearing the sentence, and from memory, you have to type the entire sentence correctly. And you have to make sure everything is in proper sequence and everything is properly spelled and it's accurate as to what you've heard. So, yeah, it's difficult because you get 1 point for every word that you type. So, for example, the sentence has 12 words. That's 12 points. So imagine if you didn't catch that, then you get to lose 12 points for your listening exam just because you didn't hear the recording or you weren't paying attention. And that's going to cause a significant reduction in your test performance. Okay. This one is the last examination. And can you imagine, okay, you sat through the entire 2-hour examination for PTE. This is the last one that you're going to get. Probably, and it's not just probable, but it's very certain that by this time you are already dead tired. You're just too exhausted. You're just too drained. And you just want to get things over with. So usually when you get to this part, your attention is not anymore as high, and your motivation is not as high as well. And so there is a greater tendency for you to make mistakes for write from dictation. And write from dictation, by the way, guys, affects not only your listening score, but also your writing grade. And this is the reason, the precise reason that a lot of students or a lot of candidates who are taking the PTE don't get a good score both for writing and for listening, because they're not able to capture certain sentences from write from dictation, or they miss out of 3 sentences, maybe 2 or 1. That's going to be 10 points, 12 points, 20 points, depending on the number of words the sentences would have. So there's a risk. Right. So to conclude, I would need to compare Ielts against the Pearson test of English and what the advantages are of Ielts versus PTE and the other way around. I want you to take all of these in consideration when you're picking which one is the best exam for you. Ielts, remember, is the most globally accepted examination worldwide, with over 11,000 organizations, including universities, professional bodies, employers, and Australian student visa and migration applications. accepting this particular test. So if you have your IELTS test result, you can go to pretty much anywhere in the world. Also, remember, IELTS academic and general training may be used for distinct purposes depending on the type of visa application. So for example, if you're applying for migration, you have the general training module. And if you're applying for work or for study, then you can take the academic module of the IELTS. On the other hand, the Pearson test of English is accepted only by a limited number of institutions, mostly for study applications. The PTE is accepted by thousands of academic programs globally and is approved for all Australian visa and migration applications. But if you're planning to go, say, for example, to the UK, or you're headed to another destination like the US or maybe Canada, it might not be the best examination to take because it is not accepted in those places, particularly for migration or work purposes. Maybe for student visas, yes, but not so much for work or for immigration. However, according to the Pearson Test of English, it is accepted by an increasing number of professional associations around the world for registration and assessment. So we can actually see a bright future ahead of the Pearson Test of English, especially if other countries start recognizing the test. Hopefully soon, because it's actually easier to pass compared to other examinations in the first place. IELTS is computer delivered and a paper-based exam, whereas the Pearson Test of English is purely a computer administered examination. In the computer delivered version of IELTS, this is actually one of the differences that you have to take note of. And I would have to say that this one can be a deal breaker in your test, because in the computer delivered IELTS, you may skip questions and come back to them later to complete or check your answers. In the Pearson Test of English, because it is a web-based examination, there's no going back. You cannot check your answers after the test is over. Once you submit your answer and you click next, it's done. You cannot go back to that item anymore. You have already submitted that answer. So you can only navigate forward through the questions, and you must correct your mistakes before moving on to the next question, because there's no going back in your PTE academic examination. You can only go forward. Another difference: the IELTS writing and speaking tests are marked by English experts following global marking standards, which might have already been discussed in a lot of sessions here at IFNG. You know, your band score descriptors, they are being used by human examiners to assess your performance in the test for speaking and for writing. Whereas the reading and listening tests are auto-marked if you're taking the computer-delivered IELTS. When you're taking the paper-based IELTS, it's going to be marked by humans once again. Your objective tests are still marked by humans. In the Pearson Test of English, all tests are machine scored. That's machine scored, not machine scores, using PT Academic's automated scoring system. Okay, so in conclusion, if you're looking for an examination in which you can book the test much more easily, there are plenty of slots. You can take the examination anytime. Then perhaps the Pearson Test of English is a good consideration. If you're looking at an examination which will give you the test results much faster, in as little as 24 hours, then perhaps PT is a good examination. But you have to take into consideration as well your destination, because maybe the Pearson Test of English is not accepted in your destination or your institution, and you might just be wasting your money and your time reviewing for an exam that eventually will not help you get out of the country. IELTS is still by far the most recognized and the most accepted English examination worldwide. But the PTE is a very good option to consider if you're going to Australia and you need very high scores, particularly in 8.0 across the board, since it is generally easier for you to get, or relatively easier for you to get the scores that you want in comparison to the IELTS. Now, what's the caveat? when you're taking the Pearson test of English, there are more components, there are more question types, there's much to study. It's not an examination that you can take tomorrow just because you have decided that you want to take an English examination. There needs to be an ample amount of preparation for you to get a good score as well for the Pearson test of English. You need to make sure that you are prepared, that you have invested some time, effort, and dedication in reviewing the types of questions and the strategies to get the best scores per item type in the Pearson test of English. Ielts is a very simple examination. It's very straightforward. There are not a lot of question types. There are not a lot of parts, but it's harder to pass because of the human intervention. Humans are more exacting than the computers, I guess, and computers mark you more fairly. So it's all up to you at the end of the day which one you're going to take, but I gave you alternatives for you to consider just in case you're headed to certain countries that accept the Pearson test of English. It is a good alternative to Ielts, and it's also relatively cheaper than the Ielts. PTE right now is just $210 in comparison to $11,650 for regular academic or general training Ielts. So if you're looking at the more affordable exam, and by the way, guys, for first-time takers of PTE in the Philippines, you can use our code. That's the NINER code, NINER, all capital letters. And if you use our code, you get 10% discount off the price of your Pearson test of English. So it's going to be right about $9,000, a little over $9,000, and it's going to be a lot more affordable compared to Ielts if you use the NINER code. So here at NINER, we are offering that discount for you guys to use. You're free to use that discount code if you're booking your Pearson test of English. It's going to make your Pearson test of English a lot cheaper, and we don't get any benefit from that. I mean, we don't really get a commission from referring you guys, but you can use that code so that you can get a cheaper or discounted rate for your Pearson test of English. Okay, so I'm going to now answer some questions over Facebook. So I have actually, you know, seeing some of the questions right here. Okay, right. So, oh, there are not really a lot of questions on Facebook. How about on Zoom? Yeah, so I guess if you don't have any more questions, I'll have to just look at all of the things that we have here. Right. Okay. So not a lot of questions for Pearson test of English. And besides, this is the listening examination. So I'm pretty certain that most of you will do well in the listening examination of the Ielts or the PTE. At the end of the day, they're very easy. But one final thing and one final thought, perhaps, that I would want to share with everyone. As I've mentioned a while ago, early on in this discussion, your stamina is very important. Most people do well in the listening examination because it's the first exam, but usually that level of performance wanes as you transition into the succeeding exams. And usually that's the case for IELTS. That's why writing is the worst test, because by the time you get to the writing test, you're already drained or exhausted. So my tip for everyone is to prepare. And when you prepare, you make sure whether you're self-reviewing or you are enrolled in the review center, it is very important for you to take mock tests in which you're going to simulate the entire situation that's going to happen in your written tests for IELTS, or the entire Pearson test of English from the speaking component all the way down to the listening component for 2 hours. Because when was the last time that you took a 2-hour or 3-hour exam? I would bet, maybe 10 years, 5 years ago, a very long time ago. So perhaps at this point, you're not anymore trained to sit through all of the different exams, like a battery of tests, one after the other with hardly any break in between. So you have to get back to that level when you are used to or acquainted with taking an examination for 3 hours or for 2 hours, so that you can maintain your level of stamina or vigor throughout the entire test, and you can give it your best performance. Some people um, don't necessarily flunk their tests because they are not skilled, but because they just don't have the physical and mental stamina to take the examination one after the other and finish strong when they get to the last part of the test. They do well initially, and eventually the performance level wanes or fades away. So perhaps prepare. I would always advise that you prepare correctly by training yourself to not just take one examination at a time, but perhaps work on all of the different components in one go. Not really every day, but maybe at least once every week before you take your exam, especially if you're gunning to take the examination very soon. You want to make sure that you're able to accomplish all the tests in one go so that you're pretty confident with your performance and you're not going to lose your energy when you are taking your examination already, because it's really very burdening sometimes. It's really very tiring. It will definitely be a very challenging experience for you if you're not really trained to take the examination and go through all of those different sections of the test. And one more thing, you have to be very familiar with the question types, so much so that when you see a question, you know already what you're going to do. You're not going to fumble for things to do, or you're not going to struggle at all with how you're going to pick out the right answers or how you're going to strategize to get the right answers, because that amount of panic or that amount of you thinking can also cause a lot of strain, a lot of pressure when you're taking the examination, and that's going to affect your performance as well. So make sure that you're very familiar with all question types. Like even with your eyes closed, when you see a question, even with your eyes closed, you can answer those questions because you know what you're going to do, what particular measures you're going to take to get the right answers. You know the proper strategies to apply depending on the question type. And those you can learn from a very good review center. So I hope that you will be part of 9.09er. And if not, when you self-review, make sure that you're using the right materials. We have a YouTube channel where you can watch all of our videos for Pearson Test of English, for Ielts, for OET, and all other examinations for that matter. The channel is 9.09er Ielts OET PTE. You can search it on you can search it on YouTube. It's absolutely free to watch videos there. If you're not yet decided on reviewing in the review center, but you want to get useful insights or information that you can apply, or strategies perhaps that you can apply in your real examination, you can follow us on YouTube or subscribe to our channel so that you can see updated videos every once in a while. And even if you're self-reviewing, you can actually get it's like useful information that you can apply in your real examination. Or for those people who'd like to enroll at 9.09er, you can send us a message at 9.09er official. We have over 100,000 followers. You will definitely know that it's the right page because we have a lot of followers. And do check out our feedback as well. We have a 4.9 rating on Facebook with hundreds of comments and recommendations from our students here at 9.09er. All right, so if you have any more questions, please do send me your questions over Facebook or maybe through Zoom if you are joining the Zoom meeting. All right. Do you have a discount for Ielts? No, we don't have discount codes or promo codes for for Ielts here at Niner, and I don't really think that Ielts provides discount codes as well. So only for PTE, unfortunately. Even for OET, we don't have discount codes. I don't really think these institutions provide discount codes right now, and Ielts in particular has not really done so in the recent times. Okay. All right. So one more thing, guys, before I let you go. If you have friends who are also interested to take either IELTS or OET and they're finding the listening part very hard, or they are not very familiar with what they're going to do, or perhaps they're not decided on whether they should take IELTS or the Pearson Test of English, then you can refer them to IFNG's Facebook page, because this video is going to be uploaded on the page and you can view this at the later time if you want. If you want to watch this again, you can also do so. this is going to be on the page of IFNG under the live tab. So just go ahead and click that live tab, and you're going to be able to see a lot of other videos that we have already recorded here at 9.09, or sharing you guys our tips, strategies, and our techniques to get the perfect scores for IELTS. Not just, of course, the passing scores, but the perfect scores for the test, because our lecturers have gotten perfect scores in the first place, right? And by the way, if you are looking for an examination that will really get you those perfect scores, PTE is a good choice. In fact, just last month, we had 3 students who got perfect 90 over 90 overall in the Pearson test of English. That is something that is unheard of for IELTS, or that is like a feat that is very hard to achieve or attain for the IELTS. You will probably accomplish that after many years of training, but for PTE, sometimes even with just 3 weeks or 4 weeks of training, candidates already get really, really high scores in the test. So think it over, and maybe you'd make a realization on what examination is the perfect fit for you. All right. So yeah, if you don't have any more questions or concerns, give me a like if everything's good, or maybe a heart. And yeah, once again, my name is Brian. I will be seeing you in one of our future sessions here at IFNG and 9.09er IELTS Review and Tutorial Center. Admin, do you have any questions for me?
Hi, Sir Brian. Okay,
Hello.
so I think that's all. It already sufficed my questions about the listening part of the
Great.
PTE exam. So guys, anyone else who has any questions before we call it a night?
Yeah, wala na. Okay, right.
Any questions?
Wala na.
It's
Okay,
your
so
chance.
yeah, this is your chance to ask your questions, right?
Mhm.
If you have any clarifications,
If
because
you're thinking on taking the exam, diba? Malay nyo. Ito na sagot.
my personal experience with this was I had very little time to prepare for PTE. For IELTS, I had more time to prepare. I had like almost more than 3 months of review for IELTS. But for Pearson Test of English, because I was asked to take it in a rush, I just had to review the modules and then learn the strategies. I had to learn the ropes in just a couple of weeks, but still I got a perfect score in everything. So I would definitely have to say that this is a lot easier compared to IELTS. If you're considering going to Australia and you really need the high grade, this is a very good examination to take. But again, if your requirements aren't that high, or if you want a more globally recognized examination, of course, IELTS is unbeatable in that department.
Okay, so hashtag Brainy Brian indeed.
All right.
Okay.
I shall be seeing you again in one
Okay,
of
thank
my
you, Sir
future sessions.
Brian.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, IFNG. See you
We're
guys.
looking forward for another lecture with you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.